Traveling at the speed of ideas on the Knowledge Transfer Exchange. Brought to you by the Florida Department of Transportation, the Training Development Team, and the State Office of Construction. David Sadler, Director, 605 Swan Street, Tallahassee, Florida, 850-414-4150. And now, today's guest.
My name is Daniel Strickland. I am the State Construction Specialty Engineer. I'm responsible for a myriad of things, one of which being the CEI, Scope of Services and Performance Evaluations. I'm going to be speaking on just a brief overview of the Scope of Services and just an overview of the Performance Evaluation criteria. And Olivia Townsend, who works with me, she's going to be talking a little bit more as to the specific process for conducting the performance evaluations for CEIs. And we also have Bruce Lytle here that's going to touch on the actual PSIS system, which is a new web-based system, and he will show you and navigate around that system some as it's very new and just now came out. This pie chart here shows kind of an overall total amount of expenditures that we pay for professional service contracts. As you can see, the pie chart there, it shows 5%. There's the orange in kind of the top right is basically what shows as all CEI professional services contracts. Now, keep in mind this chart is also only depicts the top 10 different professional services types of contracts. There's roughly over 50 other ones, so I just picked the top 10 just to show you kind of an idea of the amount of money we spend, and it's in the next slide I'll show you how much that is broken out by district. So again, this is the last 5 years of money we spent by district, and it looks like District 4 has had the most, along with District 2, and that's roughly $200 million that we spend in each of those districts, again, like I said, over the last 5 years. Just to show you what the scope of services, it's a contract for professional consultant services that applies, like I said before, various other types of work such as design consultants and others. Essentially, it describes and defines the scope, which is required for the administration, inspection, materials, sampling, and testing of construction projects. Some of the requirements of the consultant are to not only administer, monitor, and inspect, but also they're required to observe the contractor's work to ensure that they're on schedule. They have to identify and report discrepancies to the department, in addition to direct the contractor in order to correct those issues. They also negotiate and approve supplemental agreements in accordance with CPAM. This last one here you can see is potential for errors and omissions, which is what Olivia will also speak on briefly. So that can result in errors and omissions if they were to essentially approve a supplemental agreement that should not have been approved, or if they directed the contractor to do something that was not in accordance with the plan. So there's potential claims we can get funding back from the CEI in event of negligence. The procedure 375-030-007 is the Professional Services Consultant Work Performance Evaluation. That's for all professional services, not just for CEIs. Essentially, it evaluates the work performance for all advertised major types of work. So the PM is to ensure that the consultant firm has the knowledge, skills, experience to make decisions in accordance with the contract. This may also apply if they're for minor types of work, depending on whether the significance factor warrants such. Again, the PM is the FDOT's construction project manager, so it's an internal staff. Both the procedure and CPAM Chapter 4.1 requires that the PM be responsible for completing the interims, quarterly, and final performance evaluations. In addition to that, they record the grades in the PSIS, which is the Performance Services Information System, which Bruce will be touching on here in a little bit. In addition to that, they also are required to use the project manager's grade system, PMGS. These evaluations are discussed with the consultant prior to inputting those into the system. That way they're not potential claims later or disputes later rather, and that way it's up front so that they can resolve any issues prior to inputting those grades in the system. As well as they are retained for 5 years in the system. That's what I was reflected on the graph in the previous slides. These are the areas that the evaluation includes, and they're also given various weights, which I'll show you in the next few slides. But the first one is overall management of the contract. They identify issues and resolution, communication and coordination, documenting project issues, effective administration of the construction contract, which is weighted the most. I'll show you that in a little bit. Permit monitoring, proactive to public concerns, and the effective construction cost and time. The first one here again is just a screenshot that shows all of the various criteria for this management of consultant CEI contract. This one's weighted at 12. These weights were developed and identified years ago when the CEI program came out, and I believe it was a task team comprised of several district personnel, central office personnel. Mr. Sadler was included on that, and they all decided on various weights for each of these things, and they felt that was important depending on the significance or critical nature of each. I won't go through each of these, but I'll just briefly go over just a couple of them. I mentioned hybrid. We are with the new PSIS system. We are going to separate, based on some issues with the system, we had to separate the full CEI service contract evaluations with the hybrid contracts. Hybrid contracts are such that when you have a need for specialized inspection services and not for the entire contract, that's when you would utilize the hybrid contract. So we're splitting those out. So some of these will be duplications in the hybrid contract, which I'm not going to go over those. They have to be compliant with DBE goals. They have to effectively implement and administer their QA plan, which is required to be submitted every 6 months. Olivia will talk about that soon. They are required to utilize their staff efficiently and make sure that their staff are qualified and certified accordingly. And there's a few others in this one, but I won't hit on those. The next category is issue identification resolution. This one's weighted a little bit more. The first one there is that they're proactively identifying issues. They're conducting thorough analysis to identify and find other alternative solutions. We consider them as DOT, so we want them to make decisions to meet our expectations. They're resolving those issues timely and minimizing time and cost impacts. The third category is communication and coordination.
The CEI is evaluated based on if they provided necessary project information to all project stakeholders.
It's established to track communications. They're scheduled, held, and documented pre-construction conference. They're actively holding the meetings as required by CPAM. They're notifying the department on any issues that impact schedule and costs. They're documenting everything accordingly. They're also communicating or required to communicate with department personnel on various things outlined here. It's all about communication. The fourth category is project documentation. They're required to keep monthly and final estimates up to date, track, review, monitor RFIs, shop drawings, contract changes, etc. They are also required to input information to Site Manager, EDMS, MAC, and other applications. They're verifying pay items accurately. Any modifications are clear, accurate, and sufficient backup documentation. This one's the highest weighted one. I mentioned this earlier. Effective administration of the contract. They administered the contract according to the plan specs and contract provisions, reviewed, approved, and monitored the contractor's QC plan, provided daily inspection and testing services. They reviewed the estimates to make sure those are accurate. They also are heavily involved in evaluating the contractor's performance as well, so we want to hold them accountable for that, make sure that they were accurately addressing and reporting contractor issues. Permit monitoring is another category. They're required to monitor, verify, and document all conditions were met. They also verify contractor submittals, proactively work with the EOR contractor and permitting agencies to resolve any other environmental type issues. The next category is proactive, being proactive in regard to public concerns. They're required to provide current updates, traffic shifts, durations, any impacts to residences, businesses, hospitals, etc. They're required to prepare, maintain, distribute a contact list for emergency personnel, contractor personnel, and consultants. They're documenting, tracking appropriate actions for any public initiated inquiries and communicating with the PIO or the appropriate district personnel on those issues. Again, it's all about communication and coordinating issues with the public. Next one is the effect on construction costs and time. There's two criteria in this one. Scheduled submittals were reviewed in accordance with the specs. They met with the contractor monthly to discuss the schedule and took appropriate action when the contractor gets behind. Second criteria is they verified the utility relocations and they resolved any of those issues in a timely manner in order to avoid scheduling conflicts and delays. The last slide I'm going to speak to is just a real quick overview of the hybrid contract. Again, it's a separate criteria. And what I just showed you, some of those were duplications, but we didn't want to go into too much detail into the hybrid. It's essentially the same, a lot of the same criteria with some exceptions, but the criteria here, again, are management of the contract, staffing, and services all weighted differently. And these were developed recently by Mr. Sadler and ourselves based on the new system and how we were going to incorporate that into a separate form. These weightings were developed by us to ensure that these were evaluated accordingly and meeting the expectations of our office. With that, I'll turn it over to Olivia to go into the actual process for evaluating performances.
Thank you, Daniel. Let's go ahead and start talking about how exactly we do these evaluations. Specific criteria that Daniel just showed you is shown in PSIS, or if you wanted just to pull up the evaluation form numbers right there on the screen. If a criteria does not apply to that particular project, then we don't use it in the calculation of the average. Everything's rated on a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being outstanding performance. They went above and beyond everything that we asked. 3 is just they met the criteria that's listed. And then 1, there was unacceptable performance. They didn't even meet the minimum. If you give someone a 1 or a 5, you'll need to enter a comment saying why exactly you gave them that rating. So the first thing that happens is an initial in-depth review. This needs to happen within 6 months of the commencement of services. And we just keep those records for the life of the contract. And the in-depth review, we're just basically making sure that they're giving us what they said they were going to give us in their technical proposal. We'll look at areas of personnel. Are the people that are actually on the project the people they said were going to be on the project? Do they have all the equipment that they need to administer the contract correctly? And then do they have the appropriate contract documents, plans, specifications, standards, etc. available? And are they complying with the material testing, inspection documentation, and contract admin requirements? Interim evaluations. After you do the initial evaluation, the initial interim evaluation is for the first full quarter of the contract. So if you had a contract that began in February, your first evaluation would be in June, because you have to cover those 2 months before the first full quarter starts. Standard quarters, first quarter January through March, second quarter April through June, and so on. Then all other interim evaluations, otherwise known as quarterly evaluations, are performed within 30 days of the end of the following quarter. Grades are distributed February, May, August, and November. So if you had a quarter that ended in March, you'll perform your evaluation in April. The CEI will get their grade in May. During those interim evaluations, we're also going to be checking to see if the CEI firm is actually doing their own QA reviews. They need to be performed every 6 months, and we make a note in their performance evaluation if they are actually doing those QA reviews and if they are effective. If there are any deficiencies found, then those require remedial actions. We'll talk a little bit about that a little later in the presentation. But some actions that may or may not happen, depending on what the problem is, could include reassigning personnel, increasing frequency of monitoring, or increase the scope and frequency of training for those consultant personnel. The big final evaluation covers the period from the end of your last quarterly evaluation to the end of the contract. So it's probably going to cover a period of usually 1 to 3 months. And that gets submitted within 30 days after the completion and acceptance of all CEI services. The final grade should represent the performance over the entire duration of the contract. It's basically an average of all the quarterly grades, and the PSIS system actually automatically calculates that for you. Copies of all the evaluations go to, if it's 3 or greater, just the consultant and the district CEI consultant manager. If it's less than a 3.0, which basically means they met all the minimums, it needs to go to the DCE, and then with the DCE's approval, it goes to the consultant, the district CEI consultant manager, and the director of construction. The CEI can request a meeting to discuss a grade with the DCE within 10 days of receipt of the evaluation. If there's some extenuating circumstances that they'd like to discuss, then they're free to request a meeting and discuss them. And if there's anything they want to submit for a revised grade, they can do so at that time. So let's talk a little bit about what happens if we do find that there's an error or omission or they've breached their contract. We're going to find those through routine evaluation more than likely. And we have to define what exactly the deficiency is in writing with this authority cited. It could be something in their contract, something from the standard specifications. It really just depends on what the breach is. We must allow them sufficient time to correct those deficiencies before we move forward in this process. If there's no appropriate action taken, they must provide a written response as to why they are not correcting the deficiency. And they also need to submit a plan outlining how long it's going to take them to actually correct the issue. The DCE needs to perform a review to see if the department or perhaps the contractor suffered any damages and how we're going to recover those costs. And that's just covered in Procedure 375-020-010. So we've gone through this whole process and there's still a deficiency. The consultant hasn't rectified the problem or their suggested solution didn't work. At that point, we can look at terminating the contract. The DCE will have to submit a recommendation for termination to the district secretary, the district director of transportation ops, and the state construction engineer. That group will evaluate the recommendation, and then if they agree with it, then they can recommend a termination. The district at that point is responsible for completing the CEI on the project. Either they need to get another CEI contract or use in-house personnel. All the files, records, equipment concerning that project need to be turned over to the department from the outgoing CEI. The DCE must let the contractor know that there's been a change of personnel and who will be taking over those duties. A final consultant performance evaluation on the outgoing CEI is performed to be used in the selection of future CEI consultants.
A full-length CBT has been developed since this presentation was given to Central Office Construction staff. The following are modules in the training which you may take as an FDOT employee or as a consultant through the training portal. The question and answer session follows from the original presentation since we felt it would be helpful. Module 1. Introduction to Consultant Evaluation. This module is an introduction to the email notification of a new contract and explains the assigned roles page. Module 2. Actions. Module 2 explains the contract actions page and the set work types on-off hold page. This segment also covers the assigned construction contract numbers and construction project managers page. And finally, the view contract composite scores page. Module 3, Evaluations, details the evaluations and the evaluations form page. Module 4, Evaluations Bundling. Here you will learn about the evaluations bundling and the evaluations bundle page. Module 5 explains on-demand evaluations. The My Dashboard page is explained in Module 6. Module 7, Reviewing Evaluations. This last module explains the email notification of reviews due, the reviews page, the section for reviews approving submitted evaluation and disapproving submitted evaluations on the evaluations bundle page.
The consultant evaluation system is accessible through the enterprise application listing. So if you go to the InfoNet and go to your enterprise applications link and scroll down right here, the PSIS, the consultant evaluation, that will take you directly into your dashboard in the consultant evaluation system. There's no separate sign-on needed. The application recognizes you through AD authentication and a role that you may have on a contract. Notice on the left side there's a quick start guide. That's page level help. Every page in the application has its own quick start guide, and most of the pages have links to additional help information.
Why do we need to evaluate CEI consultant performance?
Good question. To ensure that the CEIs are competent, reliable, and performing their duties in accordance with their contract, in the long run, it helps the department avoid additional costs by ensuring the CEIs are doing their jobs.
Where can I find the PSIS system?
That system can be found at the link on the screen. Keep in mind, this is an internal link only.
When should the project manager be assigned in the PSI system?
The PM is assigned during the advertisement phase and can be updated at any time by request to the district procurement office.
Where can I find training for the new system?
Training can be found in the learning curve by entering consultant evaluations in the search box. This is an internal link only.
Why are the evaluation categories weighted differently?
Evaluation categories are weighted differently based on the level of importance.
How do we calculate the final grade?
The final grade is an average of all quarterly grades submitted over the life of the contract.
When would the department consider terminating a CEI contract?
Well, the department can terminate the contract if the CEI fails to perform in accordance with their contract and if they fail to take corrective action in a timely manner.
What if the evaluation criteria does not apply to my scope of services?
If criteria does not apply, it won't be used in the calculation of the weighted average score.
That's it for now, folks. Until next time, buckle up, travel safe, and always keep moving at the speed of ideas on the Knowledge Transfer Exchange. See you next time. This has been a production of the FDOT Construction Training Development Team, building bridges to the future, one mind at a time.